The hearth fire in her house went cold 3 days before she did. A Lakota chief struck a Flint. The fire in my tipi went cold sometime in the night, and I did not get up to tend it. That was the thing I noticed first, not the cold itself, not the way the buffalo robe had shifted off my shoulder or the way the gray ash had gone pale and still in the ring. What I noticed was that I had heard the fire die. Heard it, the last small pop of a coal settling into nothing, and I had lain there in the dark and let it go, and I had not cared. Tatenka Ohenzi, they called me, the shadow of the bull. I had led this band for 19 winters. I had sat in council when men twice my age deferred to my word. I had buried 3 warriors I loved like sons and had not broken in front of anyone, not even at night, because a chief's grief belongs to the chief and nobody else. That is the price of the seat. You carry what the others cannot, and you do not set it down where they can see it. Winona had known that about me. She had known it the way she knew which roots to dig in the third moon and which to leave alone, quietly, without making a fuss of the knowing. For 22 years she had kept the fire. She had kept it in the literal way, the practical way, the way a woman keeps a fire, feeding it at the right times, banking it at night so it would hold until morning, never letting it go to nothing. But she had kept something else too, something I did not have a word for, something that lived in the way she moved around the tipi in the early light, the particular sound her moccasins made on the packed earth, the way she would sometimes just put her hand flat on my back between my shoulder blades for a moment, not a gesture, not affection on display, just a hand on my back, warm and certain, and then move on about her work. 3 winters ago, she started coughing. I am not going to tell you about the dying. It was 1 year and 4 months from the first cough to the last breath, and there was suffering in it, real suffering, the kind that strips a person thin and leaves the bones showing in ways that have nothing to do with the body. I took care of her. That is what I will say. I took care of her the way she had taken care of me, the way she had always taken care of everything, thoroughly, without announcement, because it needed to be done, and I was the one there to do it. When she could no longer walk to the river, I brought the river to her. I carried water morning and night in a clay pot she had made herself 20 years back, a pot with a small dent on one side from when she had dropped it and it had not broken, which she always said was proof it was a good pot. When she could no longer sit up for the fire, I sat up for it myself. Some nights I did not sleep at all. I sat on my side of the fire and I watched her breathe, and I listened to the particular rhythm of it, which changed over the months, and I learned the changes the way you learn the weather, not wanting to know what you are learning, knowing anyway. When the end came, I held her hand. Her small dry hand that had done 10,000 things in its life, scraped hides, dug roots, sewn skins, braided her daughter's hair, held my face between them once in the 2nd year of our marriage when I had come back from a fight with a cut above my eye, and she had held my face between her palms and looked at me the way she looked at things she was deciding about, serious and close, and then she had said, "Good, you kept your eye." Her hands. I held one of them and I talked to her. I do not know if she heard. Her eyes were not seeing me by then, but I talked to her, quiet so only she could hear, about the things we had done and the places we had been. The river bend we had found north of the big rocks, cottonwood shade and cold water, and a particular morning of light coming through the leaves that I had not remembered until I started talking and then could not stop seeing. The first winter we were together, how cold it was, the kind of cold that makes the trees crack at night, and how we had slept under every skin we owned and been warm. The sound she made when she laughed at something that really caught her, not the polite laugh, the real one, the one that surprised even her. The 3 children we raised, the one we lost, all of it. I talked about all of it, and then she stopped breathing, and I sat there for a while longer, and then I went outside, and I told the band that Winona was gone. That was 14 months before the fire went cold in the night, and I did not get up. In those 14 months I had done the work. I had led the council through 2 hard seasons. I had mediated the dispute over the horses between 2 Clouds and his uncle, which took 3 days, and required the kind of patience that is not patience exactly, but is more like staying in a room that is too small for you and refusing to become what the room is making you want to become. I had negotiated with the soldiers at the fort twice, and had come away with what I went there to get both times: fair terms on the grazing land, relief supplies that were actually delivered. Those negotiations were not easy, and the men who went with me knew it. The colonel was a young man with something to prove, and young men with something to prove are harder to negotiate with than dishonest men, because dishonest men at least have consistent motivations. He wanted me to show something, some deference, some acknowledgement that his position gave him the upper hand. I gave him nothing of the kind. I sat across the table from him in that room that smelled of pipe tobacco and green wood, and I watched him and I waited him out, which is not a thing everyone can do, waiting out a man who needs to be acknowledged, and eventually he did what men like that do when they cannot get what they are after. He settled for what was on the table. Fair terms. The land and the supplies. I brought both back. The men who had gone with me, Red Hawk, standing bare, young Flies High, who was learning what negotiations actually looked like. They did not say much on the ride home, but I could feel the particular quality of their silence, which was not discomfort. It was the silence of men who have watched something done well. I had presided over 3 naming ceremonies and 1 marriage and 1 funeral for an old woman named Stands Tall, whose mind had been leaving her for 2 years and who was at peace when she went, which is the best you can hope for. I had sat up 3 nights with a young warrior who was deciding whether to walk away from the band and go east, and eventually he did not walk away. I had done all of it. I had not collapsed. I had not stumbled publicly. What I had done was stop making fire. Not literally, not all at once, but bit by bit I had let things go cold. The fire in the tipi I let die low and only rebuilt it when the cold became a thing I could not ignore. My meals I ate when someone brought them to me, and if no one brought them I did not eat, and several days I did not eat. I stopped going to the river in the morning the way I always had, the habit of 30 years, going down before the camp woke to stand for a while in the current, and let the cold water run over my feet and ankles and feel the world be exactly what it was: water moving, rock underfoot, light coming up over the ridge. I stopped that. I stopped smoking in the evenings with Red Hawk, which we had done together for years, just sitting outside our tipis in the last of the light, not saying much, just being there, the way men who have known each other a long time can be there without having to be anything in particular. I told him I was tired. I was tired. That was true. But it was more than tired. I had started to think, not in the way you think a thing through, not consciously, not sitting down and arriving at a conclusion, but in the slow underground way that thoughts move when you do not look directly at them. I had started to think that I was finished, that the part of my life that had substance, that had weight and heat and reason, was done, that what remained was administration, maintenance, the going through of motions until the motion stopped. The council still needed a man at its head. The young warriors still needed to see someone who had not broken. The band still needed what a chief provides. I would provide it. But the word I am looking for, the thing that was missing, it was something like for. I was doing all of it, all the work, all the maintaining and mediating and leading. I was doing it well, but I was no longer doing it for anything. For the band, yes, technically, but not for any future I could see or wanted. I do not know if I wanted to die. I do not think it was that exact. It was more that I had stopped wanting to continue, which is not precisely the same thing, but is close enough that the distance between them is not comfortable to examine. The fire went cold in the night, and I did not get up, and in the morning I was still lying there in the cold and the pale gray light when I heard her at the door of the tipi. Champha Win, Cherry Blossom Woman. She had been married to a man named Standing Rock, a good man, a hunter, a man who stood where he said he would stand. He had died of a snake bite 11 years ago on a late summer morning while checking the horses at the edge of camp. Fast. He was there in the morning and gone before dark, which is a mercy of a kind. though it does not feel like a mercy when it is happening. She had raised their 2 children alone after that. Her son walks far and her daughter mourning Cloud, who had married the previous spring and moved to her husband's band 2 days' ride south. Champha Wynne had raised them both without complaint and without making herself into a figure of her own suffering, which some people do, not badly, not with bad intent, but some people when they have been through something hard need others to know they have been through it, need the acknowledgement to be ongoing. She was not that. She had buried her husband and raised her children and done her work, and if she had grief it was hers, and she kept it where it belonged. She was practical. That was the word I always thought of with her. Practical in the way a knife is practical, not cold, not hard, but clean. Made for what it was made for and good at it and not apologetic about what it was not made for. She knew plants. She knew medicine. When the sickness went through the camp 2 years back, not the spotted sickness, but a chest sickness that took down 4 people and left a dozen more weak for months. She had been the one moving tippy to tippy with her medicines, her teas, her knowledge of what helped and what did not. She had not lost anyone that time. We had spoken maybe 40 words to each other in 11 years. I want to be exact about that. We had exchanged many more words than that at ceremonies, at the communal meals, the necessary courteous exchanges of people who live 20 paces from each other and share the same fire at certain times of year. But actual words, words with something behind them, words that went somewhere, 40 maybe. She was not the kind of person who spent words she did not have to spend. I respected that. I had not until that morning thought much beyond respecting it. She pulled back the door flap of my tippy and looked in. The light came in with her. Not bright light, just the flat gray light of early morning, and it fell across the dead fire ring, and the ash and the robe pushed half off me, and she looked at me for a moment. Not a long moment, just long enough to see what was there. Then she came inside without asking. She had a coal carrier with her, birch bark folded and bound at the rim, a coal inside wrapped in dry grass, still alive. You could smell it before you could see it, that particular warm earth smell of a live coal, the kind of smell that is more ancient than almost anything, older than any story anyone has ever told. She knelt at the fire ring and she built the fire. She had brought everything she needed. She was not a woman who went to do a thing without what the thing required. Dry fiber first, a small nest of it around the coal, then small sticks arranged the right way, the way that gives air and does not smother. Then the breath, the low, steady breath across the coal, careful, not too much, not too little. I watched her. Or I was aware of her, the sounds she made, the particular small sounds of a woman who knows what she is doing building a fire, all of it familiar and not familiar at the same time, because it was not Winona's sounds, and I had not heard any sounds in this tippy for a long time except my own. The flame came up. Yellow at first, small, then steadying, the smell of the wood smoke. The light changed in the tippy from dead gray to something alive, and she sat back on her heels and looked at the fire for a moment the way you look at something you have just made. Then she looked at me. She said, "You need to eat." Not a question, not a suggestion offered for consideration. She said it the way you say a true thing when you have decided it needs to be said, plainly, because it is true, and because saying it is more useful than not saying it. I said, "I am not hungry." She said, "That is not what I asked you." I had nothing to answer to that. She was right, and we both knew it, and she did not need me to agree. She went out and came back with food, dried meat, wajapi in a small clay bowl, a piece of fry bread that one of the other women must have made that morning because I could feel the warmth of it when she set it down. She arranged it near the fire to warm, and she sat across from me, and she did not say anything else. She was not performing patience. She was not waiting me out. She was just sitting, the way a person sits when they are where they intend to be and are in no hurry about the rest of it. I sat up. I am not entirely sure why. Not because she told me to. The act of someone sitting across a fire from you, alive, present, quiet, does something that an empty tippy does not do. I sat up and I took the dried meat from near the fire and I ate it. The wajepi was good. She had made it herself, I would learn later, had made it that morning early before she came, had gotten up before the camp was moving to make something specific for a specific purpose. That is who she was. She came back the next morning with coal. And the morning after that. On the third morning I was still in my robes when she arrived, the fire already starting to die down from the night before, and she built it up again without comment. On the fourth morning I had the fire already built when I heard her at the door, and when she came in I was sitting up with tea heating over the flame, and she looked at the fire and looked at me and she said, "Good. The way you say it when a thing is as it should be, with no ceremony around the word," and she sat down. That fourth morning we talked, longer than we had in all the years before combined. I do not remember exactly how it started. Something about the horses. One of her horses had thrown a shoe, and she was asking my opinion on the man who did that work for the band, whether he was reliable, and I said he was, and somehow that led to something else, and then to something else, the way talk goes when it is going somewhere real. She told me about her son Walks Far, who was 14 and starting to test what he could get away with in the specific way that 14-year-old boys do, not malicious, just young and untethered, looking for an edge of something to push against. She asked me if I would talk to him. She did not make a ceremony of the asking, and she did not diminish it by making it sound like nothing. She just asked, directly, as one person asking another person for a real thing. I said I would. That afternoon I found him at the horses, doing a poor job of pretending he was working, and I sat with him for a while and talked to him about nothing for long enough that he relaxed, and then I told him some things. About what it is to be a man in a band like this one. About what it means to be trusted, and what you lose when you throw that trust away carelessly, and how you do not always get the chance to earn it back. I told him about a mistake I had made at his age, which was a real mistake, embarrassing enough that I had not thought of it in years, and I told it to him plainly without making it into a lesson, just told him what I had done and what happened after. He listened. He was a good boy, underneath the 14-year-old performance of not being a good boy. By the end he was listening with his whole face, the way young people listen when they are actually receiving something. Champha Wynne did not ask me how it went. She had trusted me to handle it, and she let that trust stand without needing a report. A week later the boy came to me voluntarily to show me something he had done with the horses, some management of the herd he had figured out on his own and was proud of, and I looked at it carefully and told him what I actually thought, which was that it was smart. I could see him absorb that, the way a young man absorbs genuine recognition, not flattery, not performance, but a real person telling him something real. That is what she had seen. She had known I had that in me. She had seen it before I was using it. The weeks moved, she kept coming. There was a morning in there, maybe the 10th or 11th, where I caught myself watching for her before she arrived. I had the fire up and the tea on, and I noticed I was listening for the sound of her footsteps, the particular pattern of them. She walked differently than Winona had, a little lighter on her heels, quicker between steps. I noticed I was listening for it, and I sat with that for a moment without deciding anything about it. It changed. It was no longer the coal carrying, the plain rescue of a man letting himself go cold. It became conversation. Actual sustained conversation between two people who found out slowly that they were interested in the same things, in how the world worked, in what people were actually like under their public performance of themselves, in the small particular details that made up a life, and that got lost when people told the large version of their lives to each other. She had opinions, real ones, arrived at from actually thinking about things, not borrowed from whoever had spoken most recently or most loudly. She would say something and I would disagree with part of it and I would say so, and she would either hold her ground if she thought she was right, or adjust if I had said something she hadn't considered, without making either holding ground or adjusting into a performance. It was talk between two people who were not performing for each other. There was one afternoon, not a morning visit. She came in the afternoon, which had not happened before, and she came in with a particular look on her face, the look of someone who has been thinking about something for a while and has come to a conclusion and has decided to say it out loud. She sat down and she looked at the fire for a moment, and then she looked at me and she said, "I think you are a better negotiator than people know." I said, "Red Hawk knows." She said, "Red Hawk knows. The men who go with you know. But the band thinks of you as the chief who led them through the hard years, who made the right decisions about the camps and the grazing. They do not think about the negotiations." I said, "That is fine. The result is the same." She said, "I know. That is what I am saying. You do not need them to know." She looked at the fire a moment. "You do the work because the work needs doing, not because you need to be seen doing it." I did not answer that. Not because I had no answer, but because she was right, and she knew she was right, and we both knew there was nothing to add. That is one of the things about her. She sees clearly and she says what she sees. Not bluntly, it is not bluntness. It is more like accuracy. She says the accurate thing, the exact thing, no more and no less, and it lands differently than bluntness does. Bluntness is about the speaker. What she does is about the truth of the matter. In those 14 months since Winona died, I had talked to people every day. Counsel, negotiation, the daily business of 140 people who needed their chief present and functioning. I had talked constantly, but I had not had a conversation, not this kind. She told me about Standing Rock, not the way you talk about the dead when the audience is a chief who will perform the right response carefully with the proper respectful forms. The way you talk about someone you actually knew and loved and lost, to someone you trust with the real version. She told me about the specific things she missed that surprised her, not the large things. The sound he made in the morning clearing his throat. She said he was the loudest throat clearer she had ever known, every morning without fail, loud enough to wake the horses. And for 2 years after he died, she would hear something in the camp at dawn that reminded her of it, and she would be awake before she knew why. The particular way he ate too fast, always, like the food had somewhere to be. The fact that he could not tell a story to save his life. He always started in the wrong place and couldn't find the end and would get frustrated and then laugh at himself for being frustrated. And she had loved that about him, the laugh at his own expense. The first winter after he died, she had cooked the right amount of food for 2 people every night for 2 weeks before she caught herself. She told me that and she looked at me and she said, "You know how that is." I said I did. The admission went both ways. That was the thing about talking to her, it went both ways. I was not chief and she was not a member of the band coming to the chief. We were 2 people in a tipi talking. I told her about Winona. I had not told anyone about Winona in the real way, not in 14 months. I had said the things a chief says. She was a good woman. She is with the ancestors. She is at peace. The band honors her memory. The managed things. The things that are true and that are also forms. I told Chanfa Win about the morning Winona, and I had ridden out together the summer before she got sick, just the 2 of us. We had not done that in years, just ridden together without purpose, without direction, just out. We went north toward the river and found a bend we had not been to before, a place where the cottonwoods came down to the water and the light came through them in a particular way, and we had dismounted and led the horses to the water and sat down on the bank and stayed for a long time, not talking much, just there, the sound of the water over the rocks, the smell of the cottonwoods, a kingfisher once hitting the water and coming up with something and being gone. I told her, that was one of the best mornings of my life, and I did not know that when it was happening. I only knew it after, months after, then years after. That is the thing about the best mornings. They do not announce themselves. Chanfa Win was quiet for a moment after I said that. The fire was between us and she was looking at the fire, and I watched her face because I was not trying to hide that I was watching it, and something moved in it, not pity. Not the performance of feeling, just a person receiving something real and feeling the weight of it. Then she said she knew. I looked at her. She said Winona knew that morning was one of the best mornings. That is who she was. She would have known. I believed her, not because I needed to believe it, though maybe I did. I believed her because she had known Winona, had known her the way another woman knows a woman, in the particular close way of 20 years of proximity and work and watching, the kind of knowing that is different from a husband's knowing, close in different places. And so when she said Winona knew, it was not comfort assembled from the outside. It was testimony, someone who had been there and seen. Something in me that had been held very tight for a very long time moved. Not a breaking, nothing dramatic. Something more like the first movement of ice in the early spring, the first time the river shifts under its crust, just barely. You hear it before you see it. A deep sound from underneath. I did not say anything for a while. She did not need me to. We sat by the fire until it was late, and then she went home. I want to say something carefully, because I know how this part of a story can be misheard. What happened between us was not desperation meeting desperation. I was not a drowning man grabbing at whatever was near. She was not a woman filling a loneliness that had left her judgment soft. We were two people, both old enough to know the difference between those things and the real thing, both with enough loss behind us to understand what love costs and what it is worth, and what built between us built slowly, over weeks, in the cold mornings and the evening fires, in the disagreements and the silences and the conversations that went somewhere real. I noticed things. The way she considered before she spoke, really considered, the pause visible as actual thought, not the pause of someone looking for the right social response, but the pause of someone actually thinking. The way she moved through the camp, efficient and unhurried, the ease of a person who knows what they are doing. The way the other women in the band were with her, not the deference they showed to a chief's wife or to a healer out of need, but something easier and more real, the way women are with someone they genuinely like and trust. I began to see that she was a person people went to, not because she held a position, because she was who she was. There was an afternoon I was passing near the east side of the camp, and I saw her with 3 women, 2 of them young, one of them recent to the band, a girl who had married in from another band and was still finding her way. Chantha Wynne was showing her something, some work with her hands, and she was patient in a way that was not performed patience, the way a person who actually knows a thing shows it to someone who is learning. The young woman made a mistake and Chantha Wynne caught her hand and repositioned it, not correcting, just guiding, and said something that made them all laugh. The young woman's face opened right up. I watched for a moment long enough to see what I saw, and then I went on. I noticed that she laughed. This surprised me. Not that she was humorless before, I had seen her smile, but in our conversations she would laugh sometimes at the right thing, the dry laugh of someone who has lived enough to find genuine comedy in the actual world, in the specific ways people are people. It was not a performance laugh. It caught her sometimes before she was ready for it, came up through her like something she had not planned on, and her whole face changed when it did. I found I was saying things deliberately to catch it. I noticed that I was doing this, and I did not stop doing it. One evening we were outside, the light going, the camp settling into itself for the night, she said, "I have thought you were the best man in this band for a long time. It is a particular thing to be seen by someone who is not required to see you well, not by your role, not by your years, not by the general esteem a chief is owed as part of the position. Just seeing this specific man, this particular person, and found to be the best. I had been called many things in my life: leader, chief, hunter, warrior, husband, father. I had been honored in the public way that a man in my position is honored, which is real but which is also official, attached in part to the position and not only to the man. This was not that. I did not know what to say. That is not a condition I am often in. I said Winona thought so. She said Winona was right. Then I think so too. She said it the way she said things, without ceremony, without softening it into something safer than it was. She just put it out there like something she had thought through and decided was true and decided I deserved to hear. We sat with that, the fire in front of us, the smoke rising straight in still air. Someone laughing on the other side of the camp, children's laughter, the kind that carries. I looked at her. She was looking at the fire, and I looked at her face in the firelight, a face I had seen across the camp for 11 years and had not looked at closely, the same way you do not look closely at the river or the sky because they are always there, and I looked at it now. The lines of it, the laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, the steadiness of it, the way it was a face that had been through things and had not been made into something small by them. Her hands on her knees, resting easy, the hands of a woman who worked. I said, I did not know how to come back. She said, I know. I said, I'm not sure I was trying. She said, I know that too. Then she turned and she looked at me, the same way she had looked at me that first morning at the door of my tipi, measuring and clear-eyed and not flinching away from what she saw. She looked at me for a moment and then she said, You are worth coming back to. I am not a man who breaks easily. I am 60 years old and I have not broken easily in any of those years. But something shifted at that, something physical like ice, like the deep sound of the first spring movement in a frozen river, the kind of sound you feel in your feet before you hear it with your ears. I did not say anything. I reached over and I put my hand over hers where it rested on her knee, and she turned her hand under mine and held it. Her hand was warm. The grip was easy and certain. We sat like that until the stars were fully up and the camp had gone quiet. I walked back to my tipi that night and I stood outside it for a moment before I went in. The air was cold and clear and the stars were thick above the ridge. I had stood outside this same tipi 10,000 times in my life, looked at that same ridge, those same stars or their rotations. Tonight it was different. I did not know exactly how, but it was. Inside, the fire was still going. I had built it that morning myself. I put another stick on it and I sat and I watched it for a while and then I lay down and I slept. Real sleep, the kind I had not had in months, the kind where you go down and stay down. The next weeks, some of what happened in those weeks belongs to the living of it and not to the telling of it, but I will give you what matters. I started going to the river again in the mornings. I did not decide to. I woke one morning before first light and the old pool was back, the cold water, and I went down and I stood in the shallows and the current ran cold over my feet and I watched the light come up over the ridge. For the first time in a long time I was not somewhere else in my head. I was in that water, on that rock, in that cold, in that light, present, only that. I stood there for a long time, long enough that the sky went from black to deep blue to that particular gray gold that comes just before the sun clears the ridge. A heron upstream, standing in the shallows, not moving, the kind of patience that is not effort, just nature. I watched it and I thought about nothing in particular, which was itself a change. For 14 months my head had been full of the work, the maintenance, the management, the performance of being undamaged. Standing in that river in the cold, watching that heron, there was nothing in my head, just the water and the cold and the light coming up. When I walked back into camp, Chanfa was coming the other way, toward my tipi, her coal carrier in her hand. She saw me coming from the river and she stopped and she looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Good." That one word, the same word she had used the morning she found the fire already built. Good. She said it and walked past me toward her own tipi, and I stood for a moment and then I went to mine, and the fire I had built before going to the river was still going, and I put on the tea, and when she came a little later she came without the coal carrier. I started smoking with Red Hawk again. First time I came outside in the evening to sit, he looked at me and he did not say anything for a long while and then he said, "Good evening." That was all. But the weight in those two words, the weight of a man who has been watching another man from across a distance and is glad to see him closer. We sat until the light was gone. He handed me the pipe and I took it and we smoked, the way we had done for years, and neither of us said anything about the time in between when we had not done this, because there was nothing to say about it that needed to be said. I started eating reliably every day, not because anyone was making me, because I was hungry. That sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. There was an evening, a few weeks into all of this, when the council had a dispute to settle that went long and grew difficult in the way disputes do, when the men involved both believe they are right and both, in some part, actually are. I had mediated it. I had listened for a long time and I had said what needed to be said, which was not what either man wanted to hear but was the fair thing, and in the end they had both accepted it, which is the best outcome a chief can hope for in that kind of situation. After the council broke up and the men drifted off, I sat for a while by the fire, tired in the good way, the tired that comes from having done a hard thing well. Chanfa Win came by and sat beside me, not across from me, beside me, which was different, and she looked at the fire for a moment and then she said, "I watched that." I said, "I know you did." She said, "You were exactly what that needed." I did not answer, not because I was modest about it, I knew it had gone well, but because there was something in the way she said it, something that was not just assessment of the outcome, something that was about me specifically, the man doing it. She was not saying, the chief performed the function well. She was saying, this particular man, the one sitting beside her, had done something that required what he specifically had. It was a small distinction. It was not a small distinction. Chanfa Win kept coming every morning. But the coal carrying had become something else, something more. She came and we made tea and we talked, and the talk was the real kind, and what I had begun to understand slowly was this. This woman had decided I was worth her time. Not out of duty, she owed me nothing. Not out of loneliness, she was not a lonely person. She had her son and her work and her position in the life of the band, and she did not need me to fill any absence. She had decided on her own judgment, with no pressure and no ceremony, that I was worth her time. And she was a woman whose judgment was good, whose judgment I had watched across 11 years without knowing I was watching it, and watched it be consistently sound. She had decided. That was the thing that moved in me, slow and certain, the more I understood it. I asked her to sit with me at the council fire one evening in the last part of that season. It was a real council, a real question before the band. There was a question about the winter camp, 2 options, and the elders and the warriors were talking it through in the right way, taking the time the question deserved. I asked her to come and she came, and she sat beside me, not behind me, and she listened. And twice when I asked for her view she gave it, plainly and without dressing it up. And both times what she said was useful, and both times I could see the men listening, really listening, because what she said was true and they could hear that it was true. Afterward Red Hawk caught my eye across the fire and he did not say anything. But the look on his face was the look of a man who is satisfied, who has watched something be right and is glad about it. She walked home after that and I walked with her. At the door of her tipi she stopped and turned, and there was a moment, a long quiet one, neither of us moving. I said, "You kept coming back." She said, "You were worth coming back to." I said that. I said, "I did not believe it." She said, "I know. That is why I kept coming." She reached up. She is not a tall woman, and I have always been taller than most of the men in this band. She reached up and she put her hand flat on my chest, just to the left of center, her palm flat on me, the way you put a hand on something to feel whether it is still warm. She held it there for a moment and looked at me. Then she said, "Still there." I put my hand over hers. "Still there," I said. We did not rush what came after. We were not young, and we had both been through enough to know that what you rush, you miss. We were also not people who make things more complicated than they are. By the time the snow was coming, she had taken to coming in the evenings too. After her work, After the day's business was done, she would come and we would sit by the fire and talk or not talk, the two of us in the same space, and it was the right kind of quiet, the kind that is full rather than empty. Her son walks far figured it out before anything official was said. He came to me one morning at the horses, and he looked at me for a moment with the particular assessment of a 14-year-old boy who knows more than you think he knows, and then he said, "You are a good man." Direct, the way his mother was direct, the same cadence, the same absence of ceremony around the real thing. I said, "I am trying to be." He nodded once, the way his mother nodded when she had heard what she came to hear, and went back to the horses. Chantha Wynne and I were married in the first moon of spring. It was a good ceremony, small the way we both wanted, the people who mattered, the right words, the fire built correctly in the right place. She had beaded something new onto her dress, I noticed, though she would not tell me what it signified, only that it was for this day. Her son was there. Her daughter had come north with her husband, 3 days of travel, and was there too, which mattered. Red Hawk stood with me, which was right. The old holy man spoke the words that needed to be spoken, and said them well. Afterward in the evening, it was just the two of us by the fire in my tipi, our tipi now, though the change in that word took some getting used to. Our applied to a space I had been alone in for so long. We had tea and we sat and we were quiet for a while, and she had her hand over mine on the blanket between us, and I was looking at the fire. I said, "I did not think I would have this again." She said, "I know." I said, "I was not looking for it." She said, "I know that too." There was a pause, and then she said, "Neither was I." She looked at the fire a moment. "But I saw you last winter, and I thought, that man is still in there. He has just let his fire go out, and I know how to carry coal." I looked at her. She looked back at me, and there was something in her face, not softness exactly. She was not a soft woman, but warmth, the real kind, the kind that is made of knowing and choosing again. And she reached up with her free hand, and she held my face in both her hands, just for a moment, just briefly, the way you hold something you do not want to drop. And then she let go, and she said something about whether we needed more wood on the fire, which we did. I got up and got the wood. That is the part of it I think about most. Not the ceremony, not the moment with her hands, though I think about those too, but that getting up for the wood, the ordinary continuation of things. A man getting up from beside his wife in the evening to put wood on the fire because the fire needs it and he is the one there, and then coming back and sitting down beside her, and the fire burning and her there. I will tell you something I have not told anyone. The night before the ceremony, alone, the last night alone in the tipi, I had a long time to sit with what I was doing and why. Not because I was uncertain. I was not uncertain. But there is a kind of quiet that comes the night before something real, a kind of accounting that happens in the dark without your permission, and I sat with it. I thought about Winona. Not in the way of guilt. I do not have guilt about Chantha Wynne, and I do not believe Winona would ask me to. I thought about her the way you think about someone who mattered, who shaped you, whose absence is not a wound you stop carrying but a weight you learn to carry differently. I thought she would like her. That is what I thought. Winona would have looked at Chantha Wynne, the clarity of her, the practicality, the way she does not bend, and she would have liked her. The thought settled something in me that I had not known was unsettled. In the morning, the ceremony, I looked at Chantha Wynne across the fire, dressed for this day, composed the way she was always composed, and she looked back at me with those clear eyes, and I thought, this is a woman who decided, who thought it through and made a judgment and acted on it and has not second-guessed it and will not. She decided I was worth coming back to. She decided it was worth carrying coal across a cold camp in the early morning to a man who had let his fire go out. She decided, and she kept deciding, morning after morning until I believed her. That is the thing about being chosen by someone with good judgment. It does not feel like luck. It feels like being seen. The fire in my tipi has been warm since the morning she came with the coal. I get up before the light now and I tend it. I bank it at night so it holds until morning. I feed it at the right times. It does not go cold. She comes in the morning before the camp wakes, and we have tea, and we talk or we do not talk, and the quiet between us is the full kind. And when there is something to say, we say it, and when there is not, we sit. She still brings her own knowledge of what needs doing to whatever morning she finds. If the fire needs tending, she tends it. If I need to hear something, she says it. If I am wrong about something, she tells me I am wrong about it, which has happened and which I do not resent. She is not a woman who bends herself to fit a shape someone else drew. I am not a man who would want that. We are two people who chose each other with our eyes open, and every morning we are still choosing, which is how it works, which is the only way it ever really works. One morning last moon she came in and I already had the tea on and the fire bright, and she stopped at the door and looked at the fire and then looked at me, and something in her face, quiet and particular and certain. I said, "What is it?" She said, "Nothing, it is just good." I knew what she meant. She sat across the fire from me and she picked up her cup in both hands the way she does, warming her palms on it, and in the firelight she had brought back into this place, the fire she had made from a coal she had carried across a cold camp in the early morning to a man she had decided was worth coming back to. In that light she was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful that have been through the weather and still stand. Not despite the weathering, because of it. Because you can see, in the standing, what was required. I looked at her and I knew what I had. I have been a man who led others for 20 years. I have known power in the way a chief knows it, the weight of it, the loneliness of it, the particular cold that comes with it when the fire goes out. I know what it is to carry things that no one else in the camp carries with you. I know what it is to be the one who cannot, by the nature of the position, let himself be seen as uncertain or diminished, because the strength of a chief is not a personal possession. It belongs to the people who depend on it, and so you guard it, and sometimes you guard it so well that the guarding becomes its own kind of prison. I had been in that prison for 14 months without knowing I was in it. I had been doing the work and being the chief and carrying the position and letting myself go cold in the dark, and I had called that maintaining dignity, and I had called it protecting the band, and I had called it not being a burden, and some of that was even true. But some of it was something else. Some of it was a man deciding, quietly, underground, without ever putting the decision into words, that the rest of the story was maintenance, and maintenance only, until it was done. She came with coal. She came in the cold and the gray morning, and she built a fire in a man who had let his go out, and she did it the way she did everything, without drama, without announcement, without requiring gratitude, just the steady doing of the thing because the thing needed doing and she was the one who had decided to do it. And then she sat across the fire from me and she talked to me like a man who was worth talking to. That was it. That was the whole of it. She talked to me like a man who was worth talking to, and she kept coming back, and somewhere in the accumulation of those mornings, in the tea and the cold outside and the fire between us and the talk that was actually going somewhere, I started to believe that she was right. A man does not need many things. He needs work that is real and worth doing. He needs to know that the people who depend on him are safe. And he needs one person, one clear-eyed, willing person, who looks at him without the official version, without the position and the years and the accumulated weight of what he is supposed to be, and sees what is actually there and stays. She is that. She has always been that, I think. The clarity and the willingness in her have always been there. It just took a cold morning and a dead fire for me to be in a position to receive what she had to offer. I know what it is to have someone sit across a fire from you who knows what you are carrying and has decided to stay anyway. That is not a small thing, that is the thing. She is still there across the fire. I am still here. The fire has not gone cold.